Welcome to Second Wind, the show where we explore how the most creative minds in the world keep moving forward, especially when the winds shift. I'm Gully Flowers, here with my co-host and co-founder, Kerry Finch. Today we're sitting down with the man behind the Mischief mindset to find out how he keeps the ideas sharp, the strategy sacred, and the agency unexpectedly inevitable. Greg Hahn, welcome to Second Wind.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. We were supposed to do this in Cannes, and that didn't work out for numerous reasons, because doing things in Cannes is always better planned than done.
It's just so everybody knows, we had a 11 p.m. interview scheduled at the Carlton on Tuesday night, and I was just like,
and you guys thought that was going to actually happen?
I have no idea what I was thinking. And that was the day. That was the day I got in too. So I'm thinking that sounds like a good idea. And then when I got there, it's like, what about that sounded like a good idea?
You know what?
I'm glad we're here now.
I landed at 6 p.m. that day too, and I was just like, you know what? Let's go for it.
Yeah,
why not?
I was tempted.
So, Greg, I'd love to hear you just introduce yourself, just to kick us off today.
Yeah, I'm Greg Hahn. I'm the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Mischief, which is actually 5 years old now.
Oh, 5.
And yeah, we're 5. We've breached the terrible 2s and the 3s, and we are in our tween years, I guess, in agency life.
In the terrific 5s. So, I think you spoke to, as you mentioned, you spoke to Jeff Goodby in Cannes, and I think the industry's probably evolved and changed a lot since you cut your teeth or got into the industry. But I'd love to hear about your entry into the industry, how you got in, what made you want to join advertising. Just tell us that story about how that all started.
Yeah, I mean, I've told this before, but I was originally a psychology major because I love human behavior, and I still do, and that's kind of what drives me. But I didn't like being a psychologist. I didn't like the idea of that. So I switched to journalism. And it kind of turns out like I think advertising is like the crossover Venn diagram of psychology and journalism in a way. So I naturally found my way there and I always thought it looked fun. I, grew up watching 80s TV where they had characters working in ad agencies that they didn't really show what they did, but they all looked like they were having fun. So it kind of attracted me. I was like, that's actually a way to create a living by being creative. And, I actually found my way into it and didn't go to ad school or anything like that. I kind of just on my own put together a scrappy book and good enough to get my foot in the door somewhere.
And Fallon, right?
I started off in LA. I was actually a small agency called Mendel's Design. Then I went to Imposter, which is still there and still, doing good work. And then from there, I went to Fallon. I spent most of my career, my early training years at Fallon. And then BBDO, and now I'm at Mischief.
And was that a highly structured education in the craft? I mean, obviously, I think it's interesting to think about psychology is understanding human behavior and how people think, right? And then journalism, I guess, is telling stories, simplifying things. So I think it really is interesting to think about those two things coming together. But was it Fallon where you really learned how to do insights and how to do concepts and those types of things?
I back in the day before everything was online, you had to go out and buy books. So someone gave me a bunch of archive magazines which showed great work and some annuals of one show and things like that. I just studied them. I spent so much time just in any time I could, just going through those, and what I really gained from that is how they solve problems. Not so much copying technique or things like that, but it just gave me an insight into there's so many different ways to solve a problem or to get a message out there. And as I was putting together my book, because someone showed me what a spec book was and taught me all that stuff, I just kept thinking that way of okay, it's got to go beyond a surface idea. It's got to actually have some human insight to it. So it kind of came naturally to me. And then, once I got into Fallon and, I, of course, grew up studying their work because their work made up 90% of the award show annuals at that time. And, had all my heroes working right next to me. So I just was a sponge, I just kind of tried to pick up and learn as much as I could, as I looked at it as they're paying me to go to college.
Which is such a brilliant attitude to have. So it sounds like you had a really natural passion for the industry. You know, you were sourcing, you were curious, you were creative. Was there anything that you found rubbed you the wrong way? Was there something that was more of a challenge than anything else that you had to really get your head around in order to progress in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been somewhat of an introvert. I kind of joke that inside I'm an extrovert because I think pretty good thoughts, but I don't naturally express them. So breaking through that and just having enough presence and to say something in a room full of alpha males or whatever, like you're in these big conference room with leaders of industry and things like that, and getting over that fact. I just think that side of it. And then as every creative knows, just every time you're given a brief and a white piece of paper, it's kind of like this is the time they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. So I think there's a bit of that healthy paranoia,
imposter syndrome.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I think especially at the beginning because you have to have enough wins under your belt to go like, okay, I'm going to come up with something.
My experience of Cannes this year was very heartening. I was lucky enough to interview 3 amazing women leaders, Xanthi Wells, Danielle Hawley, and Jamie Robinson, actually in the 9:30 slot before your planned 11 p.m. And Kerry was there too. And it's like I feel like this year has been a little bit of whiplash for some folks. Maybe the past 6 months. I don't want to get political, but I know that when I started in the agency world and the business world, a lot of the times the loudest person wins, right? And you mentioned like alpha males, and I think some creative people don't always do their best work in a highly like open public environment, right? Where they need to find the courage to like throw out an idea in front of a bunch of people who are going to judge, right? And I think my first agency experience at DDB in Sydney, I feel like it was back in high school. Like people were screaming at each other. It was like very,
really?
Early 2000s. And it was a terrific agency, but the culture was a little bit toxic maybe, right? Where like people, there was just definitely some like alpha bullying happening.
Okay.
So I guess, coming to Cannes and hearing from these amazing leaders at these companies, and hearing about how they still really value like diversity and like different types of voices and make space for creatives and, these types of things. I'd love to just hear about how you're feeling about leading a creative company and creative people during a time when maybe it's not like the friendliest environment for some creative people in the industry. Like, how are you thinking about, I guess, sort of protecting your people in a way, right? And making sure people feel comfortable enough to like speak up and say what they're feeling and those types of things. I know it's a big question, but
it is a big question. But I do think the culture has fundamentally changed in a good way since the early days of it's one of those things that I don't think we'll ever go back to the Mad Men era in a good way. I think that's a good thing that we've sort of past that, and that sort of behavior isn't tolerated just in general. And I hear what you're saying about what seems to be a slight culture shift the other way, but that happens naturally. The pendulum swings and then there's reaction. But I try to do my best to just be empathetic and understand where people are going from. And lucky enough to live in a bubble, I suppose, in New York City. You can't feel it as much as you can in other places. So I do think it is important, though, just to make sure that your people feel safe. We created Mischief. One of our lines was like, we want to be a safe space for dangerous ideas. So we don't want to feel people feel like they have to hold back or like they're going to get fired for bringing up some crazy idea, or that they can't say something, that's on their mind for fear of retribution. So I think, just making sure that space feels that way is really important.
I think that's, absolutely right. And that's something I wanted to ask about was that safe space. How do you make room for risk? How do you make room for bravery, basically?
It's funny, like a lot of times when we present work to us, our clients, who have other agencies they work with, is like said, our agencies would never present this to us. And they mean that's a good thing for us. It's like they're afraid to. So just the fact that we're willing to support the ideas and present them, and often they get made, a lot of times we're our own worst, in advertising, we're our own worst client. We censor out too much or we're too protective. of our client when actually they want to be brought into it. If they understand your intentions are to help their business and there's a reason why you're doing something, then I think you have permission to kind of bring them stuff that pushes them. And I think you should. So fostering a culture that like supports that idea. And, we always say that what used to be the back of the deck, the fun ideas that never get made, we'll start there. Like that's where the interesting stuff is. So, just making sure people feel like their ideas are getting supported and pushed.
And what about, so I love that about, creative risk, giving people the space, giving them the safety, sort of no wrong answers, if you will. But there's always going to be a time when the client goes, well, we said no wrong answers, but actually, too scary, too scary, too scary, too scary. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that, in terms of trying to convince a brand, a client that actually this really is the way forward?
We have very little trouble convincing because we don't really try to sell anything or convince. Okay. What we do is, and you mentioned in your intro, which I love, is like the emphasis on strategy. So we take strategy very seriously, and we work with our clients pretty closely to come up with strategic areas that we feel are right and insightful and ownable, right? So we usually limit that down to about 2 or 3 areas that we play with. And then we take them from how we got to this strategy to how the work is reflected in that strategy. And it's steps along the way. So they can see it's not gratuitous creativity and shock value. It's solving a very specific purpose. And, it feels like the inevitable solution to a problem we set out to solve. And if you take them along and don't do the big ta-da at the end of it, then I think it's much easier to see why it's right. And if a client just doesn't feel comfortable doing it, then, don't force them. Like, come up with something else. I think it's a lesson, but there's a certain amount of trust that has to take place there. And I think one thing I will say is like it's helped us that we have started off thinking of Mischief as a brand. So when clients come to us, they know what they're going to get.
Yeah,
like we're not inheriting bad clients that we have to force into something they're not. We get clients that are already open to the kind of work we do.
How many times have the big 6 reached out?
More than 6.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Now it's like the B3. It's like the big 3, but
the big
more than 6 times.
Yeah,
they've
right.
gobbled each other up.
Yeah. It's one I'd rather watch from the sidelines.
Yeah. So I guess I'm interested in like what that process looks like, right? Because I think what I see broadly in the industry is, at least from when I started and sort of learned the craft at DDB in Sydney, we had a really rigorous briefing process. It was like a piece of printed paper, and it had to be signed by the CEO. You know what I mean? Like, whereas I feel like now briefs are getting texted and emailed, and like sometimes I think we circumvent the process of like some of these strategy and
Yeah. Our briefs are really fun, to be honest with you. I always like, the closest thing I can think of at our brief is like a TED Talk. Our planners come with all this information. It's like an interactive TED Talk. They come with all this information, and Kevin, Bianca, who are the heads of the creative department, usually sit with them and the count people, and they come with notions of like 4 or 5, 6 territories that are really interesting and how they fit to the brand. And then we just workshop them. And they come with so much back knowledge and so much interesting insight into who these consumers are and what the playground is and what the landscape is. And then we usually narrow that down to like 4 areas that have insight and ideas, and we know that we can iterate off of them because we've already bashed them around and spitballed some stuff. Then we bring those to the client, and then the client kind of goes through a mini version of that where we talk them through our thinking, take them through each area we have set up, and then we discuss with the client. And often, which had been heresy in most of the agencies I've worked at, is we'll brief in 2 directions because we won't know until the creative teams really start diving into it, which ones are going to be most fruitful off the bat. So sometimes there's more than one right answer. And we do that, but with the promise of we can't say we're going to bring back work under both territories. It could be like we get into one and it's just like, this is the way to go. And the other one's just we're banging our heads against, or we might have more in one than the other. So it's not like a checkbox thing. It's just, let's keep it open until we discover it.
And are you looking for certain qualities in clients? Like, are you qualifying, inbound opportunities that are coming in?
Yeah. A lot of it's chemistry. I mean, we know that we have saying like there are kind of people, like we know right away that one is they're curious, they're open, They come knowing a little bit about us, and they just seem like people you'd want to sit around the table and bash things out, and good fun people. Like, you don't want to ever go into a client meeting dreading it. So we like to have keep things interesting and fun and learn stuff from each other.
And that takes a lot of trust from both sides, right? You need to trust in the client, you need to trust in yourself, you need to trust in the team.
Yeah.
And if you're going into it with that element of trust, I mean, that's a really positive, empowering thing. But has it ever backfired? Has it ever just gone tits up and bridges have been burned in some way?
I don't know if bridges have been burned, because we've always been trying kind of honest, but we will have what we call like a hands on the table moment where we just stop everything and go, for some reason, this isn't quite working out the way either of us are happy with. Where's the problem? And is it addressable? Or do we feel like addressing? Is it worth the time to address it? More often than not, it is addressable, and we just like needed that moment of clarity. But sometimes, what's happened a couple times in the past, which has led to some hands-on table moments, are a new CMO will come in, or the personnel will have changed, and they'll be looking for something, they'll want more performance-driven work, or they're just not in tune with where the previous, people who hired us are. And then we just say, okay, fine, what you're looking for is probably not what we're best at, so better to find a different partner.
And can you do that because that's a great road to walk if you're overwhelmed with business, right? And you can just kick it to the side but how does it work? Is that the case? Is that the case that you're overwhelmed with business? And so you can have that luxury of being true to yourself and true to the brand.
I think we always want to position ourselves in a way that we're never beholden to a client that's not right for us. So I think we're confident enough to know that we can replace that if we needed to, or that we have, we'd rather spend our energy and our time making great work for the clients that really want it. And, and that will pay off in the long run versus short term, like we need the money. I don't ever want to take a client because we just need the money, because then that's a slippery slope, because then you'll have to hire creatives who will want to do that work or can do that work. Then you start building a different kind of agency that services one kind of client, and then the fun. We try to make everything top shelf.
And in terms of the briefs you get from clients, right? You mentioned planners, which is a bit of a term that's out of fashion. So I really like that you're talking about the importance of strategy. You're talking about planners. And then you talked a little bit about like audiences, right? And I think what I find is really hard is like a lot of big brands, they go, we make paper towels, we're talking to everybody. So what do you think are the critical elements from a brief, like in terms of what you need to know from a client that set you up for success?
Yeah, I mean, our planners, strategists, whatever you prefer to call them, take the input brief from the clients, and often there's something there that they can work with, but we have our own template, our own structure. Best from the clients is as much information. We say dump as much data on us as possible. Like we don't ever pull back on how much information they give us, but it is good to know if they're targeting someone very specific, what they've tried in the past and all that kind of stuff, and what their positioning is and what the strategy is they have in their head, so we know where to start at least, and whether we take it somewhere else is remains to be seen. And
how many briefs say we want to go viral, right? I think one of the results of your incredible success is like the expectation is sort of they're going to come up with some banger idea and like it's going to create all this like buzz and virality, and we won't even need a media buy, so like how do you deal with that?
I'm sure that's the dream of a lot of clients, but we say this up front when we're meeting with people. Is like viral is a byproduct of interesting. So what you really want to do is something interesting, and then if we push each other in the right ways, it'll catch on. If you can promise viral, then you're probably running a bot farm somewhere. Yeah.
And Kerry talked about being brave as well earlier, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on any insights you have around convincing clients to do something really brave. Like you said interesting, and obviously I think everybody wants to do interesting work, but I feel like the hard part is like trying to convince a client that like it's worth taking this risk, especially in this macroeconomic environment with all this uncertainty, like a lot of clients I think are actually regressing to like performance media, to your point. So how do you convince a client to be like brave and do something crazy? Like the Tubi campaign is like pretty crazy, like
we had no problem. We didn't convince them. We were like-minded people, I think one of our first things you see on our website in every deck is the riskiest thing you could do is be ignorable. And I think our clients buy into that, and we frame it like it's far riskier to do something, spend a lot of money on something nobody remembers, sees, or cares about than it is to do something that might be slightly polarizing, but you'll get some emotion out of it. Rather have the right people love us and a few people hate us than nobody care.
And you use a lot of comedy in your work, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when to chime in with that, and how do you know when it's actually time to move away from that? Because I don't know, maybe you can, but comedy isn't necessarily the only route and the only way forward, of course. So I'm just interested to know what the balance and the flow is, and how do you ebb and flow through that?
Yeah, comedy tends to get passed on more just because people like to share funny things with their friends, and it says something about you as a person. That's the human insight there. Is like it says something about you that you found this funny, so you want to share it with other people. This is my sense of humor. So naturally, it goes viral a little bit easier, but not always the case. When we take clients through our capabilities deck, we warn them it's like tonal whiplash, because there will be funny stuff over here, but there'll also be very impactful, thoughtful stuff here, and we kind of do run the scape, but the stuff that does get the most eyeballs usually is either something shocking or funny.
And who influences you in that score? Are there certain shows, there's certain comedians that you sort of go to, that you've got your kind of black book of these are fantastic, voices, these are fantastic techniques? Are you a personal lover of comedy?
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. I study it. I listen to a lot of geeky podcasts about like the breaking down the structure of comedy. And Neil Brennan is a comedian that's talks a lot about the craft. They say, yeah, absolutely. And then Mulaney talks a lot about the craft of it, and I like to study that because I do think it applies to what we do, but also just again it's psychology, it's insights, and so as far as creators go, the more influences you have, the more interesting I think the work will become. So we try to keep an open mind to whatever's happening, but there's no one person. But what we try to look for in creatives is someone that has a wide palette. So it's not just the comedy people. It's someone who could do comedy and then 1 second do something that makes your heart move, or do something that makes you really stop and think. So we like to see creatives that have the ability to move around the metro.
And that's where it resonates, isn't it? When comedy can actually touch your heart in some way,
or make a strong point. You look at John Oliver, or Jon Stewart. Their stuff is so fundamentally powerful that what they're saying, they just use humor to like get around it.
I have a question about creative process, Greg. I'm interested in, I think one of my creative heroes is Jerry Graff. His work is just so unique and funny,
of course,
right? And I think he said something to me which I thought was interesting, which is that the creative process for him, at least, is about being together and being apart. So this combination, and I think we've all had that like thoughts in the shower experience. But he used to say some of his best ideas would come to him on the walk back to his house, right downtown. Right. Yeah, and so can you tell us about creative process, how you think about it? If there's anything specifically you do when you attack a brief. Jamie Robinson said she uses music and she thinks of a song and then she just listens to it over and over and over.
Oh, interesting. Everyone's got their own thing.
Yeah.
I like to solve problems, and I can't leave a problem unsolved. Like I have to close every loop, so I can't like do a bunch of ideas and move on. I have to solve each one, make sure this is working, right? So when I get a brief, this is speaking as a creative, not as a chief creative officer, but personally, and going back to my days at Fallon before, when I get a brief, it just stays in the back of my head forever. So you're always like looking for, creativity is connecting two dots. So you have this one dot sitting in your head, which is the brief. And then you're just going through the world kind of looking for could that be something? Could that be something? What if you did this? If you did that? And you just kind of go around thinking that way. And then one moment you'll be in the shower or wherever, or on a walk, and then something will click. Or the other way is, after all that process, you're staring at a page or a screen for some time, and you start writing stuff, and it comes that way. So I guess for me, the thing is, like, as much as you want to or try to let the problem leave or walk away from it, it will always be in the back of my head, at least. And that's not a bad thing. It's like, let that kind of simmer and try to find as many ways possible to solve it. And I think once you have one that you like, and then the pressure's off, then you're free yourself to have fun and just go way out there.
And do you feel you're given the space and time for strategy and creative development that you need from clients these days?
We work really fast. I think a lot of it is, since we do work so collaboratively between creative and strategy, we've condensed that process a lot. So,
Just
we
a
can get
couple of
those
weeks or something? What are we talking here?
Oh God, less than that. Like, some of our stuff is, within the week. But we try to give as much time to the creative part of it, to the ideation part of it. But, we've done it as shortly as, a couple of days to as long as, weeks. But,
how much of that relies in in-person collisions or whatever they call it, like being in an office together, like in a room, hammering it out?
If not in an office, then over Zoom. We just spend a lot of time, collaborating that way too. We have an office in Dumbo we like to come to, but I think that some people have to have that, and other people don't. It depends on the creative team.
And does that, because that's interesting, because some people find that really doesn't work for them, that, doing everything, online through the screen. But for you and your teams, you're finding that it actually doesn't hinder the process?
It's hard to say. We started in Zoom. Like, we never met each other, me and the founders, except for Kevin and Bianca at BBDO. The rest of the team, we didn't meet each other for a year and a half into it, because we started during lockdown.
Right.
It was all on Zoom. But I do think, like, for people who grew up in the agency, they can see, and I've seen it when I'm there, is like some of the conversations you have, just coincidentally overhearing something, or, that kind of thing, have led to breakthroughs, or have led to different outcomes, or, just hearing teams talk about, where they are in production is like, hey, have you looked at this director? And that's led to, different outcome than if we weren't there. So I do think there's huge value in it, but it's just not logistical for everybody.
By the way, I think there's an opportunity to coin a term for this. Maybe there's one that you know of already, Greg, but the experience of knowing someone on Zoom, right? And then meeting them in real life. I feel like we need a term for that.
We need a word.
That, like,
yeah, I know that feeling.
Shock, right? Of like, oh wow, your physical presence is very different.
It's almost like right sizing, because you never know how tall someone is or how short someone is.
Yeah, right.
Like, you look, so there's something different about you, and you get used to the on-screen person.
And
like,
people are different, when you meet them.
I'm not black and white, for example.
Yeah, I know. I want to be black and white. How do I get to be black and white?
But we all know that you are actually black and white, Gully. So, no change there.
Yeah, everything looks cooler in black and white.
Right.
No, I wanted to ask Greg about, Mischief is 5 years old. How do you keep that small, nimble approach, the more that you're growing and the more accolades you're winning? How do you stay fresh, and how do you keep culture as well, the company culture, especially as you did launch during COVID?
Yeah, I think the short answer is you have to make it a priority, and we are very focused on that. Like, I don't want to lose our soul. It comes back to, like, taking on the right kind of clients, because clients can shape the vibe of an agency. So it's like making sure you're taking on the right kind of clients, and then hiring very carefully, because one person can determine the culture of an agency if they're the wrong person. And, a saying I read once was that culture is defined by the biggest asshole in the building. So you got to be very careful who you hire.
Yeah.
And I prefer that to be me. And often I'm the biggest asshole in the building. So, I think we try to just be really vigilant about, like, how we guard our culture, because that's all you have as an agency. It's the only thing that separates you are the people and how you guys work and the vibe.
So who's a Mischief person? What constitutes a Mischief human?
Egoless, for one thing. Mm-hmm. But, I'd like to say empathetic, creative, caring, fun to be around, and just bring something to the room. Like when they come in the room, you're happy to see them. They light up. They change things. And I think we just tend to hire people. We don't try to go like we need carbon copies of us, but just people that bring something interesting.
It's interesting you say that because I'm hearing that a lot, and it's surprising in its simplicity, right? Fun is not something that you often, value, right? Fun is sort of this light, soft trait. And, I think egoless is something I've heard a lot before, but I recently talked to the team at Duolingo, who I think is doing some of the best work in the industry.
Yeah, we work with those guys here.
Yeah, and they talked about the 5 traits in their like employee handbook, and it's actually Wyden who came up with the idea of like fun, like make it fun, be fun, because if you're having fun, you're enjoying it, you're going to do your best work. And so, and then even in Cannes, talking to Xanthi and Danielle and Jamie, amazing creative leaders, they also all talked about like fun. And so I just think it's interesting that this very like sort of like harmless, soft word has sort of become the guiding force for so many, leading creative companies.
It could be an empty word if you don't live and breathe it. And it's not always going to be fun, but our name is Mischief. We're not here to to dampen boardrooms. We want the work to be fun. We want the work to be interesting. And I do think talent is the calling card. Like that's going to get you into the room, and you have to have that. And you got to be super talented just to get in there. But there are a lot of talented people out there. So what separates you is how you are to be in a room. Like what do you bring, and are you someone that brings light or darkness?
What I find interesting as well about Mischief is the positioning. It feels like you guys have pulled off the impossible in the creative agency world, which is obviously like a bit of a cobbler's kids situation, right? Like creatives are often the worst at telling their own stories. And I think, the work that Kerry and I do together, a lot of that is around trying to help creative companies position themselves, tell their stories, get beyond that, like, we're an independent agency in LA. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think there was a time when that worked, but that's not enough anymore. And so I think what's really interesting, you talk about the types of clients you attract with the work, right? The work is typically out front, but you also have a very specific brand. Was that process purposeful? Did you almost like turn your powers on yourself, or was that more of a just like something that evolved naturally?
We deliberately set out to create a brand, Mischief as a brand, because I did think there's too much parity, and like, why does the world need another agency? And it all started too when I was looking for like what would my next role be after BBDO. And of course, there's Wyden and the list kind of.
It's like 6 shops. It's like 6 good companies. Yeah.
But I was a CCO at that point. They had to call in, and she was doing fine. Me. But they actually did reach out, and they're super generous with whatever that they had going on. But I think what I've learned was the landscape was pretty uninteresting. And I was like, God, there's no place I'm dying to work. So I wanted to create something that felt special.
And this was COVID too. I mean, we're talking about, what was it? It was June 2020, which is sort of like everyone was getting furloughed, right?
Yeah, this was in the heart of it. Like when I got let go from BBDO, like there was massive layoffs everywhere, and nobody was hiring. And so I had some time to like think about what I want to do, and I did have calls with some holding companies and things like that. And I just wasn't excited about it. No, I felt like if I'm going to do something next phase of my career, it's got to be something that I'm really passionate about, because I really want to dive into it, and that's what Mischief turned out to be. And that, again, I started with 2 other people from Canada and brought in some partners quickly, that we all aligned on this idea that we want this to be a brand. We want people to know what they're coming for. I want people to know, like, if Mischief opened a hotel, what that would feel like, that kind of thing.
It's so different being a founder or being an entrepreneur than it is from being an employee. No matter how high up the chain, ultimately, an employee is an employee.
Yeah.
What is it that you learned that you didn't expect to learn when you started Mischief? What suddenly was like, oh my God?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's the whole encyclopedia on the business side of it, but what I learned there is just hire people who are really good at that kind of stuff, and love doing it. Hire people that are good at things you're not, is the big lesson there. But the other thing that, just the impact of it was how responsible I feel to the people who work for me. I do feel like I work for them, and they came here, they trusted that this was going to be a place that was going to support them and help them do their best work. They put their career in our hands at Mischief. So I do feel that responsibility. Like, you came here, you signed up, we are going to support you, and we're going to make sure you're doing the best work of your career.
And did you ever find that to be overwhelming? Did you ever feel like, oh my God, this is almost catatonia inducing because, you felt out of depth, or was it just invigorating?
Invigorating. Yeah, I wake up every morning really excited about it. And we had momentum. I think if we were staring into, knock on wood, we've been really lucky that we got momentum pretty quickly and it's building. So I was staring into like an empty office space, with two clients that I'm writing, depending on my hope on, I'd feel more nervous about it. But I think that we've built something that's pretty special.
I have a question about the next generation of talent, because I think this is a uniquely challenging time to be entering the market and the industry. Right. And you mentioned, putting together a book before. I assume that was like a physical portfolio, probably a big thing you carried around to different agencies. How do you think about talent for Mischief? And then what would your advice be to people trying to get into this industry and be creatives?
Well, I think you got to focus on a couple things. One is the things that are never going to change, which is, again, I go back to psychology, human behavior, insights. Learn to think that way. Build your problem solving skills, because that's not going to change. And then make sure you're on top and aware of all the technology that is just coming out now, because everyone's a novice at this point. We're all starting from the same place. So your advantage as a junior would be to come in like, I was born and raised on this stuff, like I know this like the back of my hand. But you got to have the hard skills first. You have to know the mechanics of what a good ad is like, and how to create one, how to concept, how to understand human behavior and solve problems in interesting ways. And then for sure bring, a level of understanding of the new tools and trade tricks that everyone else is just now learning.
How are you using AI personally? Because we're talking about new tools, we had to talk about AI today.
Obviously, it's amazing. Like, I've been playing around with video with it. I've been playing around with, writing. One thing I have learned is that it's not a great place. A lot of people use it as like to combat the blank page, so you have a starting space. I've tried that a few times, and what I learned in doing that is like, that's a mistake. Because what you find out what you're really thinking is when you're staring at that blank page. I'd say, sometimes I don't write to tell people what I think. I write to figure out what I think. And if you're shortcutting that, you'll lose that process, and you'll just be regurgitating what the algorithm.
That is thinking. A great quote. Is that a quote? Is that you say that a lot?
No, no.
That's great.
No, I don't know where it came from. It's just like a way writers, it's probably some writing thing I was listening to somewhere, but it is just a way that, the writing process works. So if you shortcut that and take that part out of it, you're not, first you might lose your voice. And the other thing is you're going to not understand your thoughts or the fundamentals of it as clearly.
And I think that relates back to the next generation, the younger generations learn as well, in that it's so easy. Back in the day, I had to go to the library and find books and read all the books and do all the notes and then, construct my thinking and blah, 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 blah. And these days you just, tappity tap tap and you've got your history and your research done. Right. And then you can put it through AI to do a first draft, exactly as you said.
Tap. I love that, Gary.
Yeah, right.
That's the name of the next agency. Is
Tappity Tap.
Tappity Tap. All AI.
And she's trademarking it.
Yes.
But there was just an idle comment, really, which is, I think you're making a really good point, which is, I think there's something to maybe it's because that's the way I learned, that's why I cherish it, but there's something to be said for actually putting some work into it. And through that process you are finding your opinion, whereas if you can tappity tap tap, then you are going straight to a solution or a response where it's a pretty generic
it is
response.
It is. What I would discourage any young creative or any creative doing is going straight to Chat GPT or something of the like to either write their copy first or give them like 10 headlines because then you're stuck in their box. What I mostly use it for in terms of writing, as far as just like actually writing, is proofreading. And even then, it takes out some of the voice. So I always just like say, proofread this, give me the bullet points of what you would change at the bottom, and I can decide if I want to change it or not. But it's good for research. It's good for input. And our model at Mischief is, we call it like the hourglass. So at the beginning of the process, tons of input, like get all the research, get the talk, get the chatter, what's going on in the world, to inform us as much as we can. Then the middle part, the thin part, is where the human insight and thinking and bashing stuff around comes. And then the output, if there's a way to generate something that needs to be edited 500 different ways, or if there's part of the process that can be done through video AI, then yeah, it's good for that. But don't substitute your thinking and your insight with AI.
We've talked about AI, which is, a new muscle that you're looking, that you're in the process of flexing, let's say. What other creative muscles are you still trying to develop, to build, to regenerate even today?
Well, we opened something, I don't know if you saw the big news, but we opened something called the Candy Factory at Mischief.
Delicious.
Which is delicious. Indeed, we make delicious treats for your mind and your eyes. But it's a production studio, so and that's not to substitute for our big production partners, but for really quick turnaround social kind of things like that, and there's an AI component to that. So it's been really fun to kind of get into that world and see what we can make. And the creatives you're hiring, you talked about that a little bit, is they're also producers and makers, and they can shoot. So there's that element of it too, which is fun.
I just want to go back really quickly to the hourglass you mentioned. How do you balance? I think there's a tendency for some folks to think that the whole world is online and everything is on Reddit or Twitter or whatever we call it. But there's this whole world of like real people who don't live in that space as much. And so I'm wondering, when you think about the work and research and insights, how do you balance like what you see on a computer with what you see out in the world, maybe at retail, at supermarkets, like people actually just moving about the physical world in real life?
Well, you have to be a student again of people, and our planners make sure. Is that a bad term? I don't know why.
No, I love planners. It's just the first time anyone said it since DDB. Like we used to call them planners. And I feel like no one says it anymore.
There's strategists, whatever. But they're really good at making sure we get a variety of sources, and out in the real world, we talk to real people. You'd be surprised at the nuances that can come through in just observing people.
And how do you present ideas? So they're like, I see this, I remember this bit of a trend of like presenting not a press release, an article that you might get, like the aspirational article like presentation. You said there's not a big reveal, but is there a certain like methodology to the way that you present to clients that you think is like helping to build trust and courage?
Again, I think we always start with the strategy and what problem we're trying to solve. And we also bring a lot. Like it used to be back in the day, it was like you bring one or two ideas or three tops. And we bring a lot. We often say we like to go wide before we go too deep. So we'll bring a wide array of different kind of ideas attacking the problem at different times, and we talk about them. And we don't like.
And are these visuals typically like one key visual for each idea, or is it a write-up?
Scripts. If it's TV, if it's a video, not very rarely TV, but it'll be a video or social script, if that's the case. Or a lot of times we do activations or stunts, and it's just like a key visual with like what's the bigger idea behind it. And then if they like that, let's say it's a activation. If they like the activation, then the next round we'll show them, here's how we blow it out in social, here's how we promote it, here's how, whatever video that is or social post or out of home to support it. So we show a lot, and I think that helps, the collaboration a little bit.
What would your advice be to other like agencies and creatives out there who aspire to do the type of work that Mischief does?
Let us do it. No.
Perfect.
I think there's a lot of creatives who want to do great work and maybe do have great ideas, but I think it's the alpha culture sort of has a tendency, or like by committee has a tendency to kill anything that's like unique or interesting or different.
Yeah. I mean, that is the real truth, is that there's great work being done in every agency. I've worked around enough creative people to see stuff that, is shameful that only lives in a deck, like brilliant stuff. And that's really heartbreaking as a creative, but I just think keep trying and, know that if the idea is right, fight for it as much as you can. Like, and the right people will recognize it. Also know that like there's comfort in knowing that for every one idea you see, even of mischiefs, there's 5 or 6 maybe better ones that died or that weren't selected. We have, again, our clients are pretty like-minded, so we tend to get the really interesting stuff out there. But it happens to everybody. It's just the business. You're always going to do more than gets produced.
And do you have any advice for those, leaving, school, university, college, who are going into or hoping to go into this industry? Do you have advice on how to approach that or what to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different than when I started. But right now, if I was starting it, I would treat myself again as a brand and become famous in some way, get your work out there that in a way that there's so many tools and so many modes of, promotion these days of in social and everything else that you can become a famous person, through your own work and without relying on a bunch of other people. So figure out a way to get yourself out there in places you want to be seen by people you want to be seen. So treat yourself as a brand. You're the first brief and, go do something that people notice.
Brilliant advice.
Should we wrap with the legacy question, Kerry? Are you ready for this, Greg? We get 2 reactions to this legacy question. Some people love it, some people hate it. So bear with us.
Okay, I'm not liking it already, but let's see what you got.
Yeah. Go for it, Gully.
No, I think, obviously you've probably learned from some of the greats at Fallon, BBDO. I think Ogilvy is one of my favorite advertising books. I was officially taught Doyle, Dean, and Bernbach's, sort of genius. But, in 20 years, people look back and said sort of what you changed in the industry. What would you want, them to say about you?
Oh gosh, yeah. I'll give you one of those. This is a really hard question. There's so many things that everyone would want them to say about me, but I would hope that mission accomplished. We brought some more, and in much needed time, we brought some inspiration and fun back into the industry. That would be it.
Inspiration and fun. I'm liking it.
In a time when the industry was needing it. It's not saying it was never there before us, but we try to do something that other people can follow, and also think like there's been such a refreshing resurgence in independent agencies since the pandemic, and I like to think that we we're a part of that.
I think it's a really exciting time, although a time of violent change. So a bit of a mixed bag out there.
Yeah. Hey, that's why it's interesting.
Right. Well, Greg Hahn, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate the time. And,
thanks so much, Greg.
Yeah. It was a pleasure talking to you, both of you. And thank you.